Joe talks about Joe. And now, your host, Joe Slepsky.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to Joe on Joe. It's me, your host, Joe Slepsky, and we're back this week for another episode of Joe on Joe Illustrated. We're talking G.I. Joe and the Transformers. That's important because later on there are some versus Transformers titles that come into play, but this is G.I. Joe and the Transformers from February of 1987. We're going to go into it in deep detail today, page by page, panel by panel, if needs so. And we're going to have a lot of fun doing it. Remember, we're doing all four of these issues this month / into September because we're celebrating the big skybound G.I. Joe Transformers universe that is on the verge of launching. So I'm very excited for that. And remember, we're going to be getting back to you on Joe, but we need guests to fill the guest slot. So if you want to talk about G.I. Joe and anything that you especially love about G.I. Joe, why don't you reach out to me on social media at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. That's Joe at Joe on Joe Pod, or you could send me an email to joeonjoepod@gmail.com and let me know what you want to discuss. Just like to clean up a little business from last week, I got an awesome email from listener Bradley Glenn. Bradley, you're awesome. Last week I talked about, I couldn't remember the show name Mythbusters. Apologies for that. Of course it was Mythbusters. And I talked about how when we were in college, we had this debate about whether or not Knight Rider could actually drive up the truck in Knight Rider, in the flag truck. And Bradley absolutely reached out to me and said they did cover this on Mythbusters. Now remember, I'm old. So we were having this discussion in like 1996. Mythbusters existed, but like the internet, there was YouTube, I don't think was a thing yet. So we couldn't find episodes. I remember we posted on a message board somewhere, and maybe they hadn't actually done this episode yet either. But for some reason in the, near 30 years, 25 years since that conversation began, I've never Googled it, or at least never Googled on YouTube. So Bradley pointed out they totally did do it, and we found the episode, and I watched it, and they did. It works. They did it at like 30 miles an hour, and I think at like 50 or something like that, or they did it much slower and then again at 30 or 40 miles an hour. Either way, they were absolutely doing it at normal speeds, and it worked. They say I guess it's inertia, and inertia being object in motion, stay in motion, and rest, stay at rest kind of thing. Again, I'm not a physicist in that regard, but to my friend's defense, those Jamie and the other host, they were as skeptical as we were. They absolutely thought the car was going to go launching up the ramp. They had them all strapped up in, crash gear. They were prepared for it to go poorly, and it didn't. Like the car pretty smoothly drove up. Now, I don't know if mechanically it worked or, like if it was screwed up anything in the joints. But again, like I said last week, that's not my concern. My concern was, how do you not just launch yourself up that ramp, because you're technically your wheels are spinning at whatever speed you're going. But they roughly explained it's something to do with the inertia and the difference, and because the truck's still moving and the car wants to start slowing down as soon as it's something, because they go off, they take their foot off the gas, I guess, and it just tends to slow it down or something. To be fair, I'm not exactly sure, but it worked. I saw it. Totally worked. That puts to rest a 27 year, is that right? 24, sure, 20, a long time conversation that we've been having. I can't wait to tell my friends about this, because I know they ain't listening. No, I'm just kidding. No, they're really not. But that was great. So Bradley, thank you so much for that. Like, for some reason, it was a huge blind spot. I didn't think to find the actual episode, which we did, and it was fantastic. So that was fun. And I guess I need to find another windmill to tilt at as far as childhood physics gone awry. So I hope you guys look it up. It's pretty neat, especially if you love Knight Rider. I certainly do. What else are we talking about? Oh, I know what we're talking about. We're talking about our wonderful sponsors, the Movies in a Meal podcast.
In the beginning of time, the smallest organism gained sentience and thought to itself, I really need a good meal. Then, a bunch of other stuff happened, and finally the Lumiere brothers started showing movies in France. This was all the inspiration that fellow broadcasters Brad, Keith, and Ben needed to combine these two primal needs into the Movies in a Meal podcast. The Movies in a Meal is one of the most casual and relaxing film talk podcasts you could ever listen to. These three friends enjoy a good meal together while talking all about the movies. And not just reviews. They do favorite lists, comparison discussions, genre talks, anything and everything that you can think of. They've even broken their solemn promise inherent in the name and branched out into TV talk. So I love the variety of films they bring to the table. They cover new releases, classics, cult films, often in one episode. It's really a delight to listen to, and it has something for every movie fan out there to enjoy. So if you're looking to grow your podcast library, if you eat meals, and if you've ever seen a movie, then you should give Ben, Keith, and Brad a listen and subscribe to the Movies in a Meal podcast. They've been a great sponsor to this show. I love the Movies in a Meal podcast, and I'd like all of you to love them too.
And there are some good movies out right now. I just saw Blue Beetle last week. I really enjoyed it. I have not been enjoying the slate of DC films for quite some time, and I thought Blue Beetle was solid. I thought it was really strong. It wasn't like groundbreaking in that, wow, I've never seen anything like this before sense, but the family dynamics were fabulous. I thought the script was smart. The characters, all the actors, everyone had a lot of fun doing it, and you could see that. It was a fun film. I think the weakest part, to be honest, was Susan Sarandon. It's like she kind of was in a different movie. She was playing she was a little too arch. She was a little too like cacklingly evil. But as a long time Blue Beetle guy, like really long time Blue Beetle guy, Ted Kord era, I loved it. I thought they did everyone justice, and we really enjoyed ourselves. So give Movies in a Meal a listen. I'm sure they're covering Blue Beetle.
You were saying?
Now, we are going to look at comic books that were on the shelf February 1987 with cover date of February 1987 that were on the shelf at the same time as G.I. Joe versus Transformers. Now, in reading this issue number 2, in reading this issue, and I'll talk about this a little more when we get into it itself, but it really references heavy continuity that's happening in these other issues. So it is important what's going on in the G.I. Joe and the Transformers universe at the time. So we're talking G.I. Joe issue number 56 is happening, but more importantly, we're talking about Transformers issues number 25 is on the stands this month. So that's really important as well. And they're also wrapping up the 3-part Transformers movie adaptation, which is really important because the Transformers movie was in the theaters this month that this comic book was on the stand. So that's really exciting too. So Marvel Comics, there we go. We have Transformers the movie number 3. We have Transformers itself number 25. Over in X Factor, it's one of the great Simonson covers of all time as far as Phoenix goes. It's that Jean Grey. It's Jean Grey as Dark Phoenix, then she's Jean Grey as Jean Grey, and then it's Maddie Pryor with Cyclops, running along the bottom. But that image of Jean Grey as the Dark Phoenix, that's been used quite a bit over the years in promotional stuff. When in regards to doing X-Men reprints and things like that. That's a classic image. A Simonson Dark Phoenix, so that's really good looking. New Universe is humming along. It has been Kickers Inc. into high gear. They're on issue number 4, so this is the total it's not a revamp really. It was literally a new universe that they were introducing at the time. So they're 4 months into that project that lasted about 2 years and then collapsed. And then disappeared for about 20 more years. And then they remembered it in the mid-teens. And now they've slowly incorporated some aspects of it into the regular Marvel universe, which is fine. That's world building. For some reason, that doesn't bother me as much as the Sentry bothers me. And I like the Sentry as a character as written, but I don't like him when he as a member of Marvel universe, if that makes any sense. Like I've enjoyed the Paul Jenkins written Sentry series. They're fun because he's a great writer, but there's something about that. He's such a Superman analog that I don't think he fits in any of the Avengers teams. It's kind of like when they use Hyperion on the Avengers. I don't like that either because they're just Superman analogs. I just don't think they work very well. As an occasional guest star, sure, but like as far as like being a mainstream member of the Marvel universe, I don't think it works. So I genuinely hope they don't introduce him into the MCU, which is I'm sure they will at one time. And I'm going to have that same feeling. Speaking of crossovers, so we have G.I. Joe and the Transformers 2. We also have Fantastic Four versus the X-Men. This was a fun miniseries that they dealt mostly with Franklin Richards and him being a mutant and his place with the X-Men or not. They touched on this 5 years ago. They kind of did a quasi sequel to this. I think it was early. No, it was couldn't be 5 years ago. It was early in the Krakoa era. They did a quasi sequel to this, and that was neat. I don't have very many good things to say about the Krakoa era of X-Men, but that was one of them. I like that they reached back and made a connection to this old miniseries. Yeah, that's kind of it for Marvel, because we've covered a lot of this way back when we did G.I. Joe number 55.
You were saying?
So now over at DC, let's take a look at what we have here. Let's look for some oddballs. Well, the biggest one, I know we absolutely covered this, was Batman 404. So that's Batman Year 1. So we absolutely covered that. The other one is Booster Gold 13. This is about halfway into his run. Booster Gold obviously ties in with Blue Beetle. It's Blue Beetle issue number 9. These two books at this point in time, they hadn't yet intertwined the characters. So they have like parallel printing schedules, or, like printing history would be the right word, where they both ran right about 24, 25 issues. I think Booster was 24, maybe Beetle was like 23 or 25, something like that. And they're very similar in eras that they were printing, but it wasn't until the Justice League that they became intertwined to be, blue and gold, like people like to refer to them as. I do too. I think they're great. And so because of that, and because most of that fun characterization came in the Justice League, Booster Gold and Blue Beetle, both those books kind of treated those characters differently. Booster Gold being run by Dan Jurgens, you could say it's his character. He definitely created it. The Giffen DeMatteis Justice League version was a little different. It was a little more lighthearted. Like, they didn't have to deal with some of the real human stuff. He could just be more of a cartoon caricature until a few years later when his series ended, and then they were able to do all the heavy lifting. And the same thing with Blue Beetle here is that he is treated more seriously in his own book and more of a caricature until these books get canceled in a year or so. 87, the Justice League didn't even start till 89, right? So when these books are done and out of the way, that's when the Justice League is able to use them and make them these kind of comical Rosencrantz and Guildenstern characters of the DC universe, which I love. It's very similar to the life cycle of Deadpool, where he was created, Fabian Nicieza and Rob Liefeld, they created him, and he was obviously a Deathstroke ripoff, but he was his own thing, whatever. And he was a little sassy and he looked like Deathstroke, blah, blah, all that stuff. But it was years later when Joe Kelly took the book over that they decided to do things like breaking the fourth wall and making him genuinely really, what would be considered funny, if you dig it, it's some of it's witty. And that wackiness to it. That wackiness did not exist in the early eras of Deadpool. He was nuts. Like, they definitely leaned into this guy's crazy portion of his character. And that works, and that's to their credit. But the funny part of it, the part that people really resonated with, breaking the fourth wall, just generally being silly, that was not created by the creators. And so I feel like that's a little bit of the same theory comes into play with Beetle and Booster, where the things that people, for a long time, the things that people loved about those two did not come from their original DC incarnations. They came from their versions in the Justice League. And then years later, when you get to the New 52, they did a great job of melding those to make Booster a more viable current hero on his own. And then Ted's always been, when they did the New 52, that's when, Ted got killed in Infinite Crisis. So they were just making the new Blue Beetle, right? So they didn't give that. Ted's never had that chance to kind of get his own title and re-synergize. When they did the Booster Gold title, where he was time traveling and they made him this awkward time traveling hero, that really works really well. And I think that's the Deadpool recipe of they figured out what works for this guy, and so now that's where he's going to be. Hopefully he, has a long life in that regard. Because if you remember, or if you've ever read these original boosters, yes, he was a time traveler, and he did some time traveling, but he wasn't like this time travel protector or anything. It wasn't traveling all the time. He was trying to make his home here in the 20th century. So anyway, it's a long way of saying both those books are pretty great, and you should read them if you can. So for you toy heads out there, we've got Mask issue number 1 of the regular series, not of the mini series. So that's fun. And also for you toy heads, you guys remember Warlord had a toy line looked just like He-Man. We're up to Warlord 114. It's a good looking cover. He was just in a Justice League War World animated movie that I just watched the other day. So if you're a fan of Travis Morgan, check that movie out. He and Batman, there's a whole amnesia thing, and Batman's thrown into Skartaris and stuff like that. It was neat. It was good to see Warlord on the screen. And so yeah, check that out. Justice League War World.
You were saying?
All right. And now in August of 86, which is kind of when this book would have come out, within a month or two of this, of course, Transformers the movie is on the screen. So of course that's why they're doing this crossover. And they've got the Transformers universe out there, and they've got, the Transformers movie adaptation, obviously. So that's really, for our intents and purposes, that's the big movie this summer. On August 8th, this movie came out. But the week before it was Howard the Duck, so that's wild. And also the week prior was Friday the 13th, Part 6. And then the following week, you get The Fly, the David Cronenberg The Fly movie. And you also get, the week after that, you get Stand By Me, the same day as Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. So there's like a lot of strong B movies, in retrospect, that came out this month, I don't think any of them really count as Stand By Me. Obviously, that's more A-list. That's probably the biggest movie of this August. But, Chainsaw Massacre 2, that's got a, huge cult following, is a lot of fun and crazy. Manhunter by Michael Mann, that's great, but, it's never really blew the doors off. The Fly was a big hit, but that's still kind of cultish, body horror stuff. Transformers the movies, as much as we all love it, still it's controversial with a swear word and a murder early on. One Crazy Summer was out. That's obviously a B movie. Howard the Duck, notorious stinker. So it's weird. Like it's a good month for B movies. It's a good month for like cult films. That's what I'm saying here. So yeah, so that's it.
Now, Mass is ready.
So we're gonna get into G.I. Joe and the Transformers issue number 2. Again, I'm looking at it in the wonderful IDW trade paperback. Beautiful cover by Herb Trimpe. I completely forgot that they brought in Sergeant Slaughter into this mix. So on the cover, which the design of the cover I like a lot, and I'll tell you why in a sec. But on the cover there is a Joe. You can see like there's Mutt and looks like Crankcase and Beachhead. They're fighting rattlers, and then there's just a dude in a tank top with a funny hat. And I'm like, who is that guy? It's Sergeant Slaughter, but not remembering that they actually used him in this, which, he didn't get a ton of play back in the day, but this was one of the places he came to play. What I like about this cover is it does the trick that Trimpe did in last month's issue of viewing the action that we're seeing through someone else's viewport. So we see that they're being spied on. And in this case, the Decepticons are spying on what's going on with the Joes, and you clearly see Ravage and Shockwave. It looks like the dude on the left. I Transformer heads, please apologize, but it's one of the dudes from the movie. It was one of the Planet Emissaries guys, and then it's probably Dirge in the front because Dirge is actually in the book, but it's clear that these robots are eyeing what's going on with G.I. Joe and the Transformers. And if you know what happens in the book, this is the action of Cobra attacking the luxury liner later on in the book. So it's a moment that happens, and it's a fun one.
Yo!
All right. So again, written by Michael Higgins, Herb Trimpe on the art, Vince Coletta ink, Joe Rosen letters, Neil Yomtov colorist, Donald Daly was the consulting editor. That's a new name. Bob Harris was the editor, and Jim Shooter was the editor-in-chief. So we open where we stopped, which is, it's called Power Struggle, and it's Superion, which is the aerial bot's combined form. And he's standing in front of the Joes, and he's obviously massive over them. So, it's the, would you look at that thing? We get an editor note to call back to last issue saying, look, the robot we destroyed was puny compared to this one. They're talking about Bumblebee that they actually destroyed. So the Joes are screwed. And it was a big ominous note that, that they were going to be in trouble with this, which is a little disappointing as to what happens then. So Scarlet gets on the horn and she calls into the pit, and it's there we see Sergeant Slaughter. So that's when I got into this and said, oh, that's the dude on the cover. It's actually Sergeant Slaughter. But Sergeant Slaughter, it's Lady J, Ace, Breaker, there's Crankcase, and everyone's name checked too, which is great, again, for newcomers to it. And they're saying, we've got a giant robot here, so we're in trouble. Hawk also gets a phone call that the base is again being attacked, this time, by a giant robot. So we check in quickly, and all the guys are shooting at it, basically.
Yo, Joe!
And Superion fires at them, saying it's not his desire to hurt you. But as far as we know, they just blew up your buddy, and you were sent there to hurt them. So, I'm a little confused as to that part. But, I appreciate the sentiment. That feels like something, like an editorial note of like, maybe we show some reluctance to shoot at the humans. So Crankcase is right, because he says there's no way we can stand up to it, and then he promptly gets blowed up real good. It's actually it's a nice explosion that takes out a few people. Lady J hurts her arm. Crankcase gets taken out. General Hawk knows they're instantly outmanned and outgunned. By the way, the backgrounds continue to be sparse like they were in the previous issue. Again, making me think that's more of a conscious choice because there's so much going on in these.
Yo, Joe!
Sergeant Slaughter shows up. He's in an armadillo, and they've got Mauler shooting at this thing. Everyone is, quote, giving it everything they've got. Now, to his credit, Superion, in a nice storytelling wise, I like this. I always like this, where there's 3 panels on the bottom. It starts with a kind of a medium headshot, then it just zooms in closer and closer to his eyes to kind of get you further and further into what he's thinking. And even at the last one, it's actually less of what he's thinking, but more of a command given to him. But the intensity of their assault is escalating. Don't know how much more of this we can take before we are forced to. And you get a little ... there, because we don't know what he's going to say, like murder these humans or, break off the attack. Like, which is weird, because then why was he sent there if he wasn't sent there to attack them? Was it just to pick up Bumblebee's remains? But as that happens, he gets a phone call, and it's Blaster at the Ark, which is, again, the Autobots' home base. And he's called back to the Ark at once.
Yo, Joe!
But this is where it ties into the ongoing continuity. Blaster says, which Blaster, by the way, was the portable radio. He says, our leader, Optimus Prime, has been assassinated. To which Superion screams, no. And, Blaster repeats, Optimus Prime is dead. All Autobots are ordered to return to the Ark at once. So Superion does nothing. He shows up, scares the Joes. Joes waste a lot of ammo on him. Then he kind of flies off into the sky. The Autobots don't break up into respective versions. That just Superion flies up and away. And, the Hawks are pretty befuddled. The Hawk and the Joes are pretty befuddled. I think rightly so, because he didn't really do anything. If you think about it. He showed up, he scared them, they shot at him, and he flew away. That's really weird. But this is where it ties deep into the continuity, because the previous issue of Transformers. Sorry, I keep getting my stuff mixed up this week. The previous issue of Transformers, Optimus Prime was quote unquote assassinated. Of course, he comes back, and in the This month's issue of Transformers, that comes into play in a couple pages when we catch up with the Decepticons, Megatron was assassinated. I'm sure all of this tied into the plans that dealt with the Transformers movie, right? Because in the Transformers movie, what happened? Optimus Prime was killed. Megatron got killed, and he got turned into, the emissary for Unicron, whatever, Galvatron, right? So that's what this is all referencing. Except, well, technically, let me think. Are they referencing? They might be referencing the movie, or they might be referencing the changes made in the comic book. To be honest, it's been a while since I read those. I know that's what happened, but I can't remember if they said that was like a movie occurrence and it happened in the comic, or the movie, or they made the change into the comic to reflect the change in the movie. If you can see what I'm saying there, that little slight distinction there where they did do a movie adaptation, but they also made the change in the comic so that they would be reflective, but a little bit different. And I apologize, I don't have those in front of me, so I don't know for sure. But either way, I do know that they were both written out. So what that does here is I think it hurts this miniseries on its own, is a long way of saying it. Because you've set up Optimus and Megatron as the leaders of the respective teams of Autobots in the first issue, and now you go to this issue, Optimus is dead, but it didn't happen in this miniseries. And then when we check in with the Decepticons, Megatron's nowhere to be seen. Shockwave's running the show. And when we check in with Cobra, because in the G.I. Joe comic, remember it was right around this time that Cobra was thought dead, trapped beneath the rubble of a pit, right? So now Cobra Commander's now out of the picture. So Serpentor's running things. So there's this lack of continuity. So I feel, and they were all figuring this out on the fly, but they should have just picked a point in the stories and said, that's it. Here's a side story, regardless of what's happening that month in the book. While they were trying to, I get it when ongoing series try to be reflective of that, but this is like a mini series. This is like, you need to pick a point and branch off and just tell your story. Every month it shouldn't reflect what's going back on in the regular story. Does that make sense? I hope it does. Versus a regular ongoing series, for example, Avengers, every month could and should reflect what's going on in the ongoing Captain America series, because that's happening concurrently. But if Captain America came out with a miniseries, there should just be that version of Captain America fighting off one version of the bad guy, regardless of whether or not the bad guy got killed off 2 months later in Spider-Man, if that makes sense. Anyway, roundabout way to saying is a little confusing.
Yo, Joe!
So later at the pit, this might be the most action that Ace has ever gotten outside of a Sky Striker in the comic book. Because Ace in the mix, Mainframe's in the mix. Mainframe is checking out all the pieces to Bumblebee. He's like, this is it isn't just a vehicle crankcase, it's some sort of robot, just like that Superion guy. Sergeant Slaughter's in the mix. And he points out what we were saying. Like, it's crazy as it may sound, it just didn't seem like Superion's heart, or whatever that machine has, was ever in the battle. With power like that, I'm sure it could have easily killed all of us, and yet it didn't, right? So there's a mystery. They're trying to figure it out. Hawk says there must be an explanation. Let's get to the bottom of this. But Hawk's got places to be.
Yo, Joe!
Which brings us to the next part of this miniseries that is whack. Hawk just straight up goes to the senator's apartment, Barbara, Senator Larkin, and she's like, to what do I owe this honor? So that implies, oh, this is a first time, like what? Like, this is new. And he's like, I thought you might be disturbed by what's been going on. I thought maybe I ... Hawk's a Lothario. She takes his hand and she welcomes him in. Would you like a drink? And we get a click of the door. This is romance at its most graphic for a G.I. Joe comic book, ladies and gentlemen. We know Larry ignored this in the regular Joe series, and I think he's right to do it. Not because he can't have Hawk be in a romance. I think it's just because it's weird. Like, it's just, here's a senator that someone that Hawk's dealing with on a professional level that impacts the functionality of the Joe team, and within a couple panels, Hawk's making a move. A, that's not Hawk. B, Hawk wouldn't. I don't think Hawk would do that to imperil the status of the Joe team. You know, someone who has control over their funding and their, you know, like their general mission statement, so to speak. So him having a relationship with someone in the Senate seems very out of character for Hawk. Like for him, it's the Joes come first. And I would feel like he would have to really be convinced to get romantic with someone in that kind of position. So that's one of the reasons why this feels weird. Also, G.I. Joe, G.I. Joe Transformers, they don't need this. You know, we got Duke and, well, in the cartoons Duke and Scarlet, but Scarlet and Snake Eyes and Flint and Lady J, and that's enough. Like it's never really needed in these books. Any hoots. So now we're going to check in on the evil Decepticons in their Florida Keys base. And so here's Megatron. And then he disappears by the end of the issue, right? Later on, I think they talk about Megatron being destroyed. I know I read it somewhere. So Megatron's here, and then Shockwave's calling the shots by the end of this issue. It's weird. He even talks about, like, Megatron stares at the view screen, but he doesn't know the significance of the images he watches, images of events he himself set in motion. Nonetheless, the Power Station Alpha will be theirs. So that's like, I think this was something going on in the series at the time where Megatron, I think he had his brain wiped or something like that. Something going on. And I apologize for not knowing the exact details of that, but it's weird. Like, just let one of them be in charge. Anyway, when you go to Cobra Island, then Cobra Commander is completely gone and Serpentor's in charge. Hold on, wait a minute.
Yo, Joe!
We flipped a page. So Serpentor's in charge. And so Destro and Mindbender and Serpentor and Baroness, they're having one of their great Cobra High Command moments. There's goblets and there's chicken and there's quail and there's all that stuff. Destro's disgusted because she's coming out of Serpentor. That's fun. That's a fun relationship. But Mindbender's staring at the screen. He's looking at the Power Station Alpha, which again, we still kind of haven't been told exactly why it's so special, other than, I guess, a portable power station. That might be enough. And it is itself transforming, activated by remote control.
Yo, Joe!
It takes off down the runway. And we see that Hawk is making his move. So Hawk is making time with the Senator. And Power Station Alpha is now taking off down the runway. And now this is being controlled by the Transformers, of course. They're stealing the power station.
Yo, Joe!
Shockwave says, Power Station Alpha is ours. This will herald the beginning of a new era, a new way with the Decepticons ruled by the unerring logic of Shockwave. And when this happens, Mindbender pulls out a MacGuffin helmet out of absolutely nowhere. So much so that Destro has to ask, what is he doing? And the Baroness has to say, by donning the electronic helmet and tuning it to the proper frequencies, Mindbender finishes that thought with follow the flight station. And he's basically going to take over the flight patterns of the flying Power Station Alpha. None of which makes any sense, was set up private. It was just complete MacGuffin out of nowhere. So it's fun, but random.
Yo, Joe!
And he forces it to change its heading. And we have to take a panel to check in with Forlorn Hawk, who is, making time with the Senator. And she says, I understand. Now, this is double entendre if I ever read one. Just promise that you'll take care of what's mine. You talking about Hawk, or are you talking about the power station, lady? What's up? So he's running, and the team's all getting ready to take off. Now, we got Wild Bill. You've got Lift Ticket. I think we've got a Conquest X-30s in the mix here, too. Certainly Ace and a Sky Striker. And Slipstream. Yeah, Slipstream's jumping into his Conquest. Everyone gets name checked, which, again, very smart. A lot of new people reading these books, on both sides of the table. So it's always important to name check everything. What's interesting is they miscolor the Tomahawk, and I think it's miscolored throughout. There's also a misnomer that happens later, because the Tomahawk, being beige or brown or whatever shade of brown you want to call it, could pop here. And they go with like a green, like the Sky Striker's green, which I see is more of a comic book coloring choice because the background's white. And then they have the X30 also green again because the background's white. So you want it to look different to stand out. So I get that. And that's more of a comic book decision. But then Wild Bill in the Dragonfly is green, but that is a green chopper. But you have the lift ticket in the Tomahawk, which could just easily be colored brown and still pop. And they go for kind of a greenish, light green. So it's weird. Like I feel like it could have. It's too much green on this page, I guess, is where I'm coming from. But it's good looking. The vehicles look great. And who knows? Maybe it's maybe you throw a brown on there and it just throws that whole page off because there's just a sea of green, especially when you got Lady J and her green togs in front of those vehicles. Like it's a weird coloring choice.
Yo, Joe!
40 years later, I'm second guessing the coloring. The coloring of who was it? Neil Yamtov? The talented Nell Yamtov. Here I am being a jerk. I apologize. And also, to be fair, I'm also reading the IDW trade, which I'm pretty sure, like we talked last time, I'm fairly sure this is scanned from the comics, not necessarily, and then cleaned up in Photoshop, not necessarily from any masters or anything. So there easily could be some coloring changes that I'm not seeing. And frankly, it's just because my actual issues are buried a little bit in some boxes that are hard to get to. Because I've got too many comic books. It's true. So now we're gonna spend a page and we're gonna check on that little kid, Anthony Durante. Remember him? He got shot in the neck last issue by Bombshell. And kind of like remote controlled him so that Bumblebee had to turn into a robot to save him, and then that exposed Bumblebee. He's still has a Cybertronian node in his brain, right? And he's playing with a Bumblebee toy, which is funny. So he's like a zombie at home, and his mom's all worried about him. And we see that Cybertronian node is still in his brain, and I guess that's what the Decepticons used to steal it in the first place. Because remember, Bombshell broke in, and he plugged him. He put a Cybertronian transmitter or something in the starship. So that's how they're controlling the power source. Forgot about that. But his mom is very, very worried, as she should be.
Yo, Joe!
All right. So now we get some good Herb Trimpe aerial action. Lots of empty backgrounds on these pages for sure. But they're still drawn well. The Cobra pilot sort of looks like he should be Wild Weasel, but he's not. He's got an open face. Like it could be Wild Weasel, but it's just definitely not Wild Weasel. You've got a lot of Rattlers and Cobra helicopters. They're not Fangs. They're random looking Cobra helicopters transporting the power station as it flies towards Cobra Island. The Joes show up to attack. We've got a lot of fun drawings of missiles in skies and airplanes getting shot down. There's really no rhyme or reason. It's not really a battle you can follow very closely. As far as the coloring goes,
Yo, Joe!
It's gotta be because the background was just stark white. Ace is flying a green Sky Striker, so that's absolutely got to be a choice to say there's if the water's blue because they're over the ocean, if the water's going to be blue, the sky's got to be white, and if we put white airplanes against that sky, it's going to be impossible to see, especially because we're not doing details of cloud cover and things like that. So we are definitely dealing with coloring issues around all these planes. So, just set that aside. The Cobras are blue, the Joes are green. That also quite frankly, that does simplify it for younger kids. If they're reading this, it is easier to track who's who. So, so I will say, while it may not be crazy accurate, and I think it does actually make a lot of sense for this. So look at me learning and changing minds as we go along. Now here's one thing though that doesn't work out very well. Is it's a nice panel in the middle. They kind of get a little corkscrew that Ace flies in and knocks down a Rattler out of the sky, and it is clearly Lift Ticket, who congratulates him and says, "It's about time I show you what I can do around here." But then it is clearly a Conquest X30 with Slipstream that shoots down the next Rattler, saying, I don't want to be undone. So that's just a miscommunication. I'm going to say Herb Trimpe knows who's who, and I don't know. Honestly, who knows? Who knows where the miscommunication came? But it certainly was, because that is not Slipstream saying that. That is absolutely Lift Ticket, who I was a big fan of.
Yo, Joe!
I also like Slipstream too. I don't want to, rain on his parade. He's pretty great too. So there's in the middle of all this fighting over the water and aerial dogfights, there is a luxury liner that is just randomly cruising the ocean, and it's Mr. Blackrock is flying it. I think this dude was from the Transformers comics. So it's one of those and they're not necessarily near Cobra Island, but they're not terribly far. They're on their way to Cobra Island, remember? So Blackrock is, just stay, everyone chill out. Yes, there's a big dogfight, but we'll be okay. And the Cobras realized that they could use that as a bargaining chip, per se, with the Joes.
Yo, Joe!
So Serpentor tells Mindbender, since he's controlling the ship, to circle the yacht. And so while they're doing that, they basically tell the Joes, if you don't back off, we're going to bomb the yacht. Ace relays that to General Hawk, and Hawk realizes that he's really got no choice here. We got to protect civilians. Even the senator lady says, if you have to destroy that station, the power station, you can't let Cobra have it. The people are more important, the lives are more important. So if you have to scuttle that, do it. But, Hawk realizes that if they destroyed that, it would endanger the lives of the citizens that he's trying to protect, the people downstairs on the yacht. So he's a bit of a stain still.
Yo, Joe!
Which I really like from a tactical perspective on Serpentor's side, right? That's a smart move. He saw something and he could take advantage. He ended the fight, basically says, G.I. Joe, you let us leave, let us take this and get away, and otherwise we'll hurt these people. And so they do that. Now, one of the Cobra pilots does land on the yacht, I would say accidentally, because he got shot out of the sky. But the pilot of the yacht takes that guy prisoner, which is, I think, a pretty great move. So that happens on this page. It's a good move. Good for that pilot. We never really see who it is, because he got a great mustache, and good for him. Ace even gives them the thumbs up, which is great.
Yo, Joe!
So now Serpentor says to finish it, also fire on the ship. This is another part where I kind of break from characterization here. I feel like Serpentor, especially this early Serpentor, he was all about honor and stuff. And he, that was the deal. He agreed with Hawk on the battlefield. You do this, we'll do that, call it a day. But the Serpentor that Larry wrote wouldn't have then also attacked the ship, which they do. So the Rattlers do shoot up the ship, which means that the Joes have to, they can't kind of pursue. They have to stop and help rescue the civilians. So that does stop their pursuit, but they were going to stop the pursuit anyway. That was the agreement, and they're just going to Cobra Island. Everyone knows they're going to Cobra Island. So that seems like an unnecessary betrayal of Serpentor's character, if you ask me. And all this is being monitored by Dirge, the Decepticon airplane.
Yo, Joe!
So the boat starts to sink, and the Joes have to go into rescue territory. We got some killer whales. This is what the cover image that was happening. And this Blackrock guy, he was totally in the Transformers comic books. I'm starting to remember him now. He says, "Gentlemen, are you talking about giant shape-changing vehicles?" And Crankcase's like, "Yeah, I guess that sounds crazy." And he's like, "Not at all. In fact, I may be able to help." And then that's it. We never really find out this issue. I'm sure he's going to come up again next issue of what Blackrock's up to. So now the power station,
Yo, Joe!
lands at Cobra Island, and they realize that it's been followed by what Serpentor thinks is a G.I. Joe plane, but it's really Dirge. So he transforms and lands. Allow me to introduce myself, Dirge. I'd say this, last two pages, not helped by the coloring, but the rendering is really great. Trimpe did a really nice job with the yacht, like the sinking yacht. He does a nice job with all the vehicles, especially something like Transformers that he's probably not used to drawing. He does a nice job with their transformations and just representing them, because that's always a challenge. Like a lot of times people do good soft tissue stuff like humans and stuff, and they have trouble with vehicles. Shrimpy does a good job with all this stuff. And again, the coloring is not helping it, but it's, it is what it is.
Yo, Joe!
Anyone tell Nel Yomtov I said that. I've enjoyed his work so far. And here comes Bombshell. Bombshell, of course, from the last issue. So now Dr. Mindbender, he's always got something up his sleeve, or lack of sleeves for that matter. He has something in his arm, and this is where it breaks from G.I. Joe reality too. It's like a tracking bug, obviously. But like, where did this come from? What is it? It's drawn as just a speck, but like there's been zero explanation that Mindbender has some kind of weird tracking thing that can just randomly fly up and do it. If this came out of a transformer, I get it. Like there's, you know what I mean? There's that suspension of disbelief that you have where you're dealing with a advanced robot species. So if they just have a random bug thing that flies and tracks people, you get it. But that's not what you're dealing with Cobra. Cobra is like more real, more developed technology. So what is this? It's just a plot device because they need to somehow track where the Decepticons are going and coming and spy on them and things like that. So it's just a little Deus Ex fly on the wall, I guess. Deus Ex Mindbender.
Yo, Joe!
Now back to that little kid and his mom. They go to Dr. Durante. So there's a lot of Italians here. And Dr. Durante says, your son's got but some things, so they must have given him an MRI, right? Or a CAT scan. As you can see, there's something been placed into his brain. So we're spending a lot of time with this kid. So there better be a good payoff. It's been a while since I've read this, so I don't remember what the payoff is. So spoilers, I don't know. But the doctor is like, your kid's got a metal thing in his brain, and that's what's ruining him. And because he's like in a zombie state, he's kind of vegetative, and your kid's gonna die. That's what she says, or that's what the doctor says. So the mom's properly chuffed, as she should be. Her son has a transformer in his brain.
Yo, Joe!
And here we go, Dr. Mindbender. So he's using that tracking device, and he's just quoted just a few frequencies, and homing in on the tiny device he planted on Dirge, he can monitor the conversations of these mechanical man things. And now, so he's spying on them, and it's Shockwave talking, and so now or Megatron rather, he's out of the picture now. So Shockwave's ruling things, and that ties into the regular series. So again, I wish they would have just picked a point and rolled with it. But we see that Shockwave is they're going to work on a few adjustments in Alpha, and we're going to send it to do its bidding to do their bidding. They'll choose strategic positions around this planet and cause disturbances in geothermal levels of natural fault lines. We're going to drain this planet, utilize the resources. This whole world would become a giant energy source. It's a vast molten core used to repower Cybertron. So that's their plan. So that makes sense. Now I know, so now 2 issues in, we kind of know what the bad guy prerogative is and how it can be used that way. I wish we had gotten some semblance of that in the first issue so that we knew kind of what the stakes were and why this was such an important MacGuffin. But Mindbender seems to be the only person that knows this. And is he going to do anything about it? Does Mindbender even care? He's a bad guy. He's Dr. Mindbender. He don't wear a shirt. He don't care. He don't care a whit. Anyway, so that's it for G.I. Joe and the Transformers #2. A lot of fun. A lot of MacGuffin-y, a lot of off-character stuff here. I hope that settles down the next issue, But again, I do think we're seeing why it was ignored continuity-wise and kind of written off, from a continuity perspective by Larry, of course. Obviously, he didn't write it, but there's just stuff that happens in there that's just weird, and it's okay to ignore it. But it is a lot of fun. And, you're a kid. You're a 12-year-old kid at the time. I remember getting this. I think I want to talk about this. I remember getting this in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I did not know this was a thing, and I was visiting my cousins, and we went to a comic book shop there, and I saw these, and I was like, they crossed over, and I lost my mind. And we went to every comic shop in the area for me to get all 4 issues that summer, and it was awesome. I really loved it. So Good for them. Hope you all enjoyed the show, and we'll see you next week for G.I. Joe and the Transformers number 3. Now you Joe, and Joeing is half the battle.